Welcome, everyone, to the webinar 19 for 2019, the top transformational technologies reshaping the world. I'm Mike Holman. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping here. Throughout the webinar, you can type any of the questions that you have as they come up into the Q&A box on your screen. We will have some time at the end to answer questions. We'll get to as many as we can, but if your question doesn't get answered or you think of one right afterwards, don't hesitate to email it to questions@Lux Research Inc., and we will respond. So, as I said, this is the webinar about the top transformational Lux's pick for the top transformational technologies reshaping the world. I'm Mike Holman, VP of Research here, so I help to lead our analyst team, and my co-presenter for today is my colleague Cosmin Laszlo.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Cosmin Laszlo. I'm the Director of Research Products here, and in that role, I manage the data science team at Lux. So we're constantly developing new tools, new frameworks, new methodologies to apply data science to better quantify and analyze innovation trends, which we'll highlight a little bit of today in this webinar, Mike.
Maybe even a lot of. So to give everyone a quick rundown of the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what the 19 for 19 is and how we put it together, particularly a bit about the Lux Tech Signal, which is one of the critical tools we used for that. We'll give you just a little bit of the highlights of the report, but I know that it has been available on our member site for about 6 weeks now, and so a lot of you I know have had a chance to download it and look at it. So we'll just hit some of the highlights there and spend some more time talking about, probably the biggest question that we get about it from clients, which is the so what. What does this mean? What do you do about it? And then get into the outlook. So to get us started, why is this unique? And I said, why is this unique rather than what this is? Because what this is technology foresight, right? It's predictions about tech innovation for the new year. And those, honestly, are in and of themselves are kind of a dime a dozen. You can see just some examples from the sort of first page of Google search results here. A variety of media and analyst organizations make predictions like this, and some of them even had the same bright idea that we did to make there be 19 of them for 2019. But if you start digging in and looking at where these predictions come from, how are people coming up with these? What's the methodology behind them? You can see that in most every case, it really just boils down to asking smart people what they think. There's 31 successful executives who believe they can see what will be different in 2019, or looking at sort of generic business, social, economic, and technology trends, or sometimes they just don't even tell you at all where they got this stuff from, and it's just kind of words from on high. And smart people's opinions is certainly can be valuable to get, but kind of the animating impulse here is that we thought there was a better way.
Yes, indeed. So over the past couple of years, we've seen some really interesting changes in the landscape when it comes to the technology that we have available to us when we think about this problem. So first, global innovation data. There's more of this available than ever before, whether we're talking about academic publications, so conference proceedings, research papers in journals, patents from all of the regions around the world, both applications and grants, funding, decades worth of venture capital funding going to startups, as well as more early stage funding coming in from governments, and unstructured data as well. So news, press releases, other kinds of write-ups. So the data is richer and more accessible than ever before. Paired with that, we now have an exciting suite of tools to access and analyze this data. So APIs make it easier than ever to transfer data back and forth between different systems, different applications. We have cloud computing, which has democratized a lot of these tools, making it easy to deploy applications that impact a lot of people around the world in a very cost-effective way. And then on that core infrastructure, we're able to deploy some really interesting customized machine learning, things like natural language processing, to extract insight out of unstructured text, as well as things like classification, things like regression, things like topic modeling, to better quantify those publications in patents and funding. So it's a really interesting development that we wanted to see what can this do for the question that we're asking today about the innovations to watch.
Right. Now, that said, we're not just going all the way the other direction and just giving you whatever answer the computer spits out. We really think that as much as these data science tools are important to use and can add a new level of value and rigor to this process, you still have to combine them with those smart people's opinions, that expert insight. And that expert insight is really important, I think, to do this well, both to sort of select the data and analytics that you're going to use, to look at the various signals coming out of that and have some intelligent take on what signals are meaningful. And then finally, above all, like we already alluded to, talking about what that really means and what to do about it. So that's the approach that we used for 2019. We started with a lot of inputs from that data set and the data science tools that Cosmin's team has put together, and we put those in front of the analysts to vet and select and finalize those. And one of the key tools for that was the Lux Tech Signal.
Yes. So now that we've covered, why is this important? Why is this unique? Why are we doing this? We want to shed some light, open up the kind of the black box here around how does the data science that powers part of this report work? So the Lux Tech Signal, we designed it as an objective, holistic measurement. As much as we love the gut feel of industry experts, we want to augment that discussion, augment that decision-making process with something that also brings data to the table. Secondly, we want to have the pairing of analyst expertise with the advanced analytics so that when the data science algorithm produces a list, it goes before our team of human experts to curate that list. And finally, we wanted to use this as a leading indicator, right? So we don't want to look back 3 years or 5 years. We want to look at something that potentially could tell us where these technologies are going to be trending in the next 3 years, 5 years, or even further out. So the way that this works, what we engineered, is the Lux Tech Signal, which brings in 5 different data sets. And it's those data sets we highlighted earlier. All of the world's patents, all the world's academic papers, decades of VC funding, government funding, but also our own proprietary data. So the primary research that we do day in and day out when it comes to interviewing companies, writing up reports, and analyst insights. To bring all this together, we have what is called innovation interest. So we have these 5 different data sets that are normalized and weighed, and that gives the curve that you see here. So for example, shown here for the topic of machine learning and AI, you can see how there's the low-level background interest in the research community up to about 2012, when we saw this really interesting inflection point and the subsequent rise. And today, a very, very high score on our benchmark, 96 out of 100.
Right, and a lot of what again, Cosmin and his team have done is sort of validating that with a lot of historical examples, when you see this kind of inflection point, like you're seeing here for machine learning along about 2012, 2013, that is a significant, very often significant leading indicator of business opportunity. So without any further preamble, let's get into the 19 for 2019 and talk about what those are. So you can see the full list here, along with indicators of what's up from last year, what's rising, what's falling, what items are new to the list. And again, I know a lot of you have had the chance to see this, and of course it is available if you haven't already on our member site, along with a lot more detail about all of them. But so we won't get into marching you through a description of all 19 of them. That could get a little tedious, but we would love to hear questions. As again, you can use that Q&A box if you do have questions about the list. So as far as why did this one go up or that one go down, or where's this, what's, why is this one off the list? And I do think that was one of the interesting trends that we saw for this is, right, there is a lot of new stuff that came on from the same exercise we did last year.
Yeah, when we look back to 2018, we had 18 technologies highlighted. Some of those did drop off the list. They're still really interesting. The majority of them continue to have good progress, but this field is advancing so quickly. Whether you're looking at digital or energy or materials, it really highlights the importance of ongoing monitoring, where we do see things like blockchain, for example, finally make it onto the list, where there is that start to some commercial relevance where we felt that it was time to put it on here.
Blockchain made it on. Yeah, it was one of the big questions we got last year when we didn't have it on the list. So like I said, I won't walk through all of these, but just to give you an example of the analysis that we did include in the report for each one of these 19, I'll pick a highlight of what was the biggest riser from 2018 to 2019 on the list, and that's wearable electronics. So what you'll find in the report for wearable electronics, as well as each of the other 19, is that analyst and expert insight. Kind of talking about here with insight from Hirose Kuruma, who is our lead analyst in this space, talking about at greater length in the report, but talking about why it's important. Right, there's in the case of wearables, we've really seen these progress beyond, fitness trackers and smartwatches that were really, kind of just extensions of your smartphone, to personalized sensor modules that have a lot of interesting applications in medicine and, enterprise for workers, gaming and entertainment, and so on. And again, talking in more detail about what the importance of it, and in particular what you should do about it, where here in wearables, for instance, we think the real game is in creating new business models based on data from these wearable devices, more so than just manufacturing the hardware. What can you do in terms of using the data, for instance, as Apple and others are doing with taking some of the heart rate data from smartwatches and showing that they can use that to detect some even more serious medical conditions like atrial fibrillation.
And then we look to augment this with the data side of things. So how does the data support this story? Well, we see that wearables interest has been around for more than a decade, but it's been a slow start. Around 2014, we saw kind of a critical mass be achieved by the industry, where there's a rapid rise in the innovation interest within wearable electronics. We saw companies like Apple and Samsung and Fitbit and others really start to heavily push the market with innovations. We also saw a lot of activity from the venture capital community. So during the past 5 years, more than $1.8 billion coming in. Now, for the purposes of the space and the time we have today, this is a highlight, but we have a dedicated tech page for wearable electronics, as well as all the other things that we covered in the 19 for 2019. So if you want a lot more data kind of behind this, so what is the exact VC data, what is the exact patent data and academic paper data and so forth, please do check out the tech page on our member site for a lot more in-depth information.
And so, as we said, we wanted to spend probably the balance of the rest of the time on the webinar here talking more about that. Again, the biggest question we get from clients is so what? Well, what do we actually do with this information? It's really interesting. It's fascinating. It's certainly a good input for us to be looking at. But how do we actually go about taking this and making it relevant and deciding what to do? And I think doing that is straightforward in principle, though certainly not simple to put into practice. And we use a 3-step process. So as far as taking action on the 19 for 2019, you want, first of all, just to understand the relevance, because not all of these technologies are going to have the same impact for every company and for every industry. If you're a packaged foods company, something like battery fast charging might have some applications here and there in your enterprise, but it's probably not strategically critical the way that it might be, for instance, if you're an automotive company that's looking to develop a line of electric vehicles. So you want to kind of rank and prioritize the relevance of those technologies, and we'll walk you through an example of how we do all this. The second step, it's really about building the capabilities and understanding the technology in that area. So you want to invest perhaps internally in R&D and research programs, but particularly find partners. And that's something, obviously we again work a lot with clients on who are the key players in this space, who should we be working with in order to get the most, to help advance our efforts the most effectively. And then finally, kind of once you've aligned things and built the capabilities, it's about setting the strategy to act. What's the right go-to-market strategy? What's the right business model? What's the right approach to actually, go about converting this technology into something that's a real business opportunity? So we wanted to look at a particular case study, and we chose to do one on Ford. In large part, that's because the automotive industry is one that's being affected and disrupted by a lot of the technologies on the 19 for 2019, and there's some good examples to pull from with Ford specifically. Again, just sort of drawn from our ongoing research. Obviously, this isn't anything proprietary that we're sharing here, but it's thought it would be helpful to kind of apply that methodology as an example for a specific company and talk about how they have or could put those three steps into practice.
So for step one, how do we understand the relevance to a particular industry? We have a new tool that we launched recently. So if you go to 299.luxresearchinc.com, you'll see the availability of the Lux Tech Radar. So this has 5 rings, number 1 to 5, where 5 shows the highest level of innovation activity, and 1 is the lowest. So there's a type of head box there. You can put in the technologies that are relevant to you in your industry and create this kind of relevance radar and be able to export it and use it. So we've gone ahead and built one out here using that tool for automotive. You'll see that the radar automatically segmented it into 3 different sectors: digital innovation, materials innovation, and energy innovation. A lot of these have blue circles on them. They're part of the 19 for 2019. But there's also some others, like LiDAR, for example, or edge computing, that didn't quite make the cut, but we still think are important to consider in this area.
So taking that then to the next step of investing and finding partners, there's an interesting example from the world of graphene. So graphene's a carbon-based nanomaterial that has a lot of interesting properties and a lot of potential applications in structural materials, as well as in things like batteries and sensors and other electronics. So a lot of potential relevance to the automotive industry. In an area where Ford has taken that step of investing and finding partners. Here, working with what we regard as one of the leading startups in this space as well, XG Sciences. So they've developed graphene foams, and it's notable because this is actually something that's being commercialized in 2019. The Ford F-150 and the Mustang are going to include these that are released this year are going to include the graphene foams for noise control under the hood. So it's a pretty big step for graphene commercialization. One of the reasons my colleague Anthony Schiavo will tell you that 2019 is going to be the year of graphene. But it is a significant step for that technology, and also for Ford as well, because that's while that particular application is more of an incremental improvement, that is going to kick off more expansion opportunities and growth in graphene in general, and notably through that relationship set up Ford to be successful with delivering some future wins and being able to take advantage of some of the more significant benefits that graphene can also offer in the future. And one of the reasons that having the right partnerships is very critical, because that can get you these early wins as well as setting you up for future success. And again, so you can walk through a number of different areas and a lot of other partnerships and partnership opportunities, but we also want to, even once you've built those out, there is still the question of what is the right go-to-market strategy, what's the right strategy to adopt for these technologies. And I think for Ford and for auto companies in general, one of the most interesting strategic questions, in all of tech innovation is, what do you do about last mile transportation, last mile mobility? So this tech area is really about all of the different technologies and transportation modes that are used to get both people and packages to their final destination. And that's really been about the traditional automobile in a lot of areas, but is increasingly involving new approaches like ride-hailing service, car sharing, ride-sharing services, as well as really unique modes such as bikes and scooters and drones and flying cars even in the future. And how do you respond to that trend and those changes for a company like Ford is a really challenging question. So Ford has done a lot of that, finding partners and building capabilities already. They're working on some food delivery applications, including some trial autonomous work with companies like Walmart, Postmates, and Domino's. They bought an electric scooter company. They've been doing various things in ride-sharing services, partnering with Lyft, launching their own service, piloting an autonomous ride-sharing with Baidu's Apollo unit in Beijing, and even touching on some more niche applications like non-emergency medical transport, for instance, with Beaumont, a major healthcare provider in the Midwest U.S. So there's, again, a lot of partnering, a lot of kind of capability building here. But people don't. Ford talks about transitioning to being a mobility company, but I don't think many people think of it that way yet. How do you actually realize that? How does Ford go about making a business here? And it's a challenging question because I think the key insight is that when you talk about these mobility services, they generate a lot of value through data, and it's really the platforms that own the customer demand capture a lot of that data and a lot of the value. And that's why companies like Uber and Didi and Grab and others are so important and so highly valued. Ford, realistically, is not going to compete with these companies. It would be cool if you could turn Ford into the next Uber, but if I were an executive there, that's not what I would want to bet my career on trying to do. So how do you sort of best play this trend and this opportunity from Ford's position? It plays off that insight that it's the data that drives a lot of the value, and how Ford can use that data to build on its real strength in making vehicles. Because as the nature of mobility changes, the nature of what vehicles are going to look like is inevitably going to change also. The concept of what does a car look like once you no longer need a driver and a steering wheel is sort of the most obvious example of that. But as you get in, specialized autonomous vehicles for grocery delivery or things like electric scooters becoming more popular, there's a lot of ways in which the vehicles that people travel around in are going to change. And if Ford or whomever can really leverage that data from partnerships to understand what those changing needs are going to look like, and build the vehicles that can kind of make them the arms dealer to all of these service providers, is I think the smart way for a company in Ford's position to kind of play that trend. And Ford's an interesting example because they have experience doing something actually a lot like this already. If you look at their transit vans business, so they sell these commercial vans, but they also sell, particularly through a network of partners, various upfits or customizations for those. So understanding the different ways that people use these and being able to customize the van as a luxury shuttle in the example sort of shown here, or as a catering van or a van for your electrical contracting business, drives a lot of that value and of that business line. And that's going to be true sort of on steroids as you get into really different ways of looking at mobility. So just to recap, right, Ford or you or whomever can look at that 19 for 19, understand the relevance, sort of using tools like the radar to map the impact of the technologies to your industry, invest and find partners as Ford did in graphene and has started to do with some of its mobility partners, and then set the strategy to act as Ford still needs to do yet to realize the mobility business.
Great. So now we're going to move on to the fifth and final part of the presentation, the outlook. Before we do that, again, we'd encourage you, if you have questions, please do put those into the Q&A box. So a few closing thoughts here. We're going to group the 19 for 2019 technologies into 3 different buckets of action for how you can think about them in terms of your R&D roadmap, how you should adopt these into your organization. One of them we would call the current rock stars of innovation. So if you look at the Lux Tech Signal performance for these, they have dramatically risen to very, very high scores in the course of about 5 to 7 years. So this is where we find technologies like, for example, 5G, machine learning, 3D printing, wearables. The second category, which we call getting ready for prime time, are things that have had a little bit of a harder road to market, right? These are riskier technologies. These are things like, for example, blockchain, things like the microbiome, things like the solid state battery space, or perovskite solar, or generative design. Really interesting technologies, but riskier as well. So we encourage companies thinking about these to take more of a portfolio approach to diversify risk when it comes to them. Finally, for those that do have kind of an appetite for risk where they are looking to make some long-term bets, here's 2 that are more under the radar: materials informatics and last mile transportation, where nobody really has this quite figured out yet. It's still a really great time to get in there and stake a solid market position that could pay off big dividends down the road. Now, this is our 19 for 2019 view. It's an annual report, but the space changes day by day. So what we have developed is an interactive leaderboard, which we call the Lux 299 Top Innovations. It's available on our member site at 299.luxresearching.com, and it constantly updates with our latest research. So if, for example, you want to keep up with deep learning or 5G or blockchain and so forth, we would encourage you to bookmark this page, follow the technologies you're interested in for the latest reports and other content from Lux. And so with that, over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Cosmin. So we do now have some time to take questions. We've already had a bunch coming into the Q&A box, which is great, but feel free to keep those coming. And if you have other questions, don't hesitate to put those in. And if we don't get to them on the call, someone from Lux will be in touch after the webinar. So looking at what we have already, Cosmin, this is probably a good one for you, asking, what's your opinion about why solid-state batteries went down 5 places? Since it is the aim of a lot of businesses are trying to make that technology happen.
Yeah, solid-state batteries continue to be a really interesting and exciting technology. We remain optimistic about it, but there has been that gap between the commercial reality today versus people's expectations. So we look at solid-state batteries as something that for 2025, for 2030, will be able to make a market impact. But the job of the developers is made really tough by how much investment has gone in 2017, in 2018, and will go in this year into traditional lithium ion. There's incredible amount of money going into new factories for taking that incumbent lithium ion and making it better and better. And so that keeps raising the bar for how good solid state battery needs to be. There's also some really fundamental technical challenges that developers are having a little bit of a slower time addressing than they had hoped for. So things like the ionic conductivity of the materials being used, things like the safety, but also the mass production capabilities. How do you build factories to make these things? So it remains a really exciting technology, but it's a combination of a tough incumbent and some pretty hard technical challenges.
So this is another something that we've actually you and I have talked about a little bit offline here. Someone asked, based on your experience to date, can you predict upcoming inflection points in the tech signal?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that we have ongoing research projects about. So the early stage monitoring, kind of early stage detection, low-level signals, that's something that we're dedicating some significant R&D here at Lux on. My colleague, Kevin C., is going to be giving a presentation on this at our Lux Summit in Boston. So that's just in a few months where we'll be able to share some more results. But yeah, it's a combination of really interesting things where you're looking to automatically detect new topics. So to use things like topic modeling to detect topics automatically before an analyst even knows, that the concept is emerging sometimes. But then also kind of calibrate, what qualifies as a low-level signal. So defining those thresholds and having that historical data. So we do think it's possible, but it's kind of this cutting edge area of R&D where we're excited to be working on it, and we'll be sharing some more results in a few months.
Yeah, it's a really cool area. I've seen a few presentations at other conferences from, people who are trying to use machine learning in various ways to detect weak signals and things like that. But honestly, nothing that's really all that baked. So I'm curious to see what you come up with too. So another question, stupid question. The asker says, I don't think it's a stupid question actually. Why do you put the set strategy after invest and find partners? Wouldn't you want to have a strategy, even a basic one, before you invest, research, and or look for partners? No, it is a good question, and I think it is true that you have to have kind of some idea of where you're going, what the strategic importance of these technologies is, and what kind of capabilities that you're going to need before you go in. But I do think that, and Ford's kind of an interesting, the whole mobility case is a really interesting example of this. And I think it probably applies to other areas like machine learning and things like the microbiome and stuff as well. They're really early emerging areas. You probably want to have some idea going in, but what the idea that you go in with about your strategy is almost certainly not going to be what you come out with, right? Once you start learning about these technologies, learning about the capabilities, learning how customers are going to respond to them, what needs you can and can't address with them, the capabilities that they're really going to have, you're inevitably going to come up with very different ideas and thinking about what your successful go-to-market strategy or business model is going to be by the end. So yes, it's helpful to have an idea of that going in, but I think it's really only after you've gotten to really study and understand the technology that you can actually set what the strategy is going to be. All right, I think we've got time for one more question. We've got a lot around machine learning and AI, which is not a surprise since that was, after all, number one on the list. But I think this one relates to strategy, saying, do you see AI/machine learning as a service in the future, something that you can sort of just plug into and use, as opposed to having to maybe build or run it yourself.
That is one of the biggest challenges that we think organizations are going to have to wrestle with, which is how do they best equip themselves to use AI. And I would say it's a hybrid approach, to be honest, where you do want to leverage some of the great tools that are being built out there by the ecosystem. So, something as simple as looking at the ever-expanding set of AI tools available on AWS, right? The work that Amazon's machine learning arm is doing, or Google has probably the best AI development effort in the world, whether it's DeepMind in London or in California. So definitely leverage those in terms of off-the-shelf, ready to go, but they are trained to apply across industries, and nobody knows your customers and your business problems as well as you do. And so that's where I think the hybrid approach comes in, where you need on-staff data scientists, on-staff subject matter experts, as well as, frankly, just different translators between the different groups to implement that successfully. So we would fully encourage people to start building up that data science team internally. And, you don't have to build it yourself. We would fully encourage leveraging innovations from the ecosystem, but you will find that there's places where you need to customize the solution, or you need to bring together different parts of the stack from different providers to really make it work for you and for your customers.
Yeah, I think that's something, we kind of see it even here, but I think that's we see with a lot of companies and organizations, right? When you talk about using AI and machine learning, one of the most interesting and powerful things about it is there is so much in the way of tools that's freely available, open source and things like that, right? That you do need to have some data scientists and folks like that on your team to be able to help, find those things and implement them. But I think in a lot of ways, using those tools effectively is going to be as much about how you can kind of upskill and train your existing, experts and leaders and executives to understand and deploy the impact of those tools, as it is about, having the best data science team to come up with the algorithms, right? It's not just about hiring data scientists. It's about training the leaders you already have to work with the data scientists and work with the machine learning tools.
100%. Yep.
All right. Well, thanks, Cosmin. Thanks to all of you for joining. That concludes the webinar. The slide presentation and the recording will be sent out to all of you on email today. After you leave the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a survey. We really appreciate any feedback that you can give there. It really does help us to inform and improve our future webinars. So thanks again for your time. Thanks for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.